All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight and welcome. I'm Rachel Belmer. I'm the Milwaukee Art Museum's Director of Membership, and it is my privilege to welcome you here this evening for the member preview celebration of Art, Life, Legacy, Northern European Paintings in the collection of Isabel and Alfred Bader. This major exhibition pays tribute to the extraordinary lives and generosity of the late Doctors Isabel and Alfred Bader, and also illuminates the transformations that occurred across Dutch society during the Baroque period. The collection of 76 paintings presented in Art, Life, Legacy was assembled while the Baders, longtime museum patrons and supporters, were living in Milwaukee. They not only gave artworks to the museum, many of which are in the Milwaukee Art Museum's collection today, but they were formative in the development of the European art program at the museum. We are honored to host the only U.S. exhibition of the Bader's exquisite collection. And we have many people to thank this evening. This exhibition would not be possible without the generous support and partnership of our presenting sponsor, Bader Philanthropies. We would like to extend a heartfelt thank you to the entire staff and board of Bader Philanthropies, who have been improving the lives of people in Milwaukee and beyond for more than 30 years by supporting projects that have a deep and meaningful connection to the Bader family. Their compassion and kindness are the hallmark of their leadership in our community, and they have contributed significantly and profoundly to preserving Isabel and Alfred Bader's legacy at the Milwaukee Art Museum. Most recently, they established the Isabel and Alfred Bader European Art Program Endowment Fund and are now sharing this exquisite collection and captivating story with our visitors. So we sincerely thank them. Yes. We would also like to thank the Consulate General of the Netherlands and New York for supporting the exhibition programming as part of the Dutch Culture USA programs. I'd also like to extend our sincere thanks to the 2023 Visionaries, whose leadership support helps make all our exhibitions possible throughout the year. And I'd like to name those visionaries now. Mark and Debbie Attanasio, Donna and Donald Baumgartner, Murph Burke, Joel and Caran Quadracci, Sue and Bud Selig, Jeff and Gail Yabuki, and the Yabuki Family Foundation. And finally, I'd also like to extend our thanks to the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel for providing media sponsorship for the exhibition. And last, yes, thank you to the Journal Sentinel. And now you can give yourselves a round of applause, because last but certainly not least, we would like to extend our sincere thanks to you, our Milwaukee Art Museum member community. Your annual support through your memberships helps drive everything happening here at the museum, from our exhibitions, our programs, the care of our collection, and our wonderful building. And we're truly honored to be an organization that you support. So thank you for being here tonight for this evening. And then finally, it is my great privilege to introduce our speaker tonight, Dr. Tanya Paul. Dr. Tanya Paul, the Isabel and Alfred Bader Curator of European Art, has been a wonderful and valued colleague here at the Milwaukee Art Museum since 2013, joining us from the Philbrook Museum of Art in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Tanya has been working in museums for over 20 years, including roles at the J. Paul Getty Museum, the Sarah Campbell Blaffer Foundation at the Museum of Fine Arts Houston, and the University of Virginia Art Museum, now the Fraulein Museum of Art. Her curatorial resume is impressive and held in the highest regard. Beyond this major project, she has organized the 2016 exhibition here at the Milwaukee Art Museum, From Rembrandt to Parmigianino, Old Masters from Private Collections, the major traveling exhibition, Bouguereau and America, which originated here in Milwaukee and showcased more than 40 masterful paintings by the French academic painter William Adolphe Bouguereau, as well as her current focus exhibition, A Very Strong Likeness of Her, Portrait and Identity in the British Colonial World, which reveals a complex story of identity, family dynamics, and British colonialism in Jamaica. Tanya was also responsible for the 2014 reinstallation of the entire European art collection and was the coordinating curator of Heaven and Earth, 500 Years of Italian Painting from Glasgow Museums, as well as A Modern Vision, European Masterworks from the Phillips Collection, just to name a few. Tanya received her MA and PhD in art history from the University of Virginia. And with that, I am so thrilled to welcome Tanya to the stage.
Thank you so much for that lovely introduction, and thank you so much to all of you for coming. It is such a pleasure to be here tonight and to celebrate this wonderful exhibition with all of you. And I do have a few just little thank yous. Primarily, I mean, of course, we're so grateful for our supporters, but and our sponsors, but I also want to give a special thanks to the museum staff. There is a small army of people who goes into creating a project like this, and they come from departments across the museum, from curatorial, conservation, registration, our wonderful preparators, graphic designers, marketing, development, visitor services, security, and learning and engagement, to name just a few. But I also want to extend a special personal thank you to just a few individuals who had a very particular hand in making this come together quite as beautifully as it did. The first is my wonderfully talented assistant curator of European art, Catherine Sawinski. It's a privilege to work with her every day, and she's wonderful. I'm also grateful to Liz Siegel, Liz Flagg, Liddell Abbott, Kim Thino, the amazing crew who installed the exhibition as beautifully as they did. Haven Falk, who created the wonderful graphic designs. If you got an invitation and you have seen any of the beautiful graphic designs for the show, that is all her. Incredibly talented, and Grace Winter, who made all of that come together. And then finally, I also want to thank the endlessly talented David Russick, our exhibition designer, who somehow takes the ideas that are kind of bubbling around in my head and turns them into this beautiful, amazing space that I could not have even conceived, but that makes the exhibition look as wonderful as it does. And I also have to extend a thank you to my co-curator in this project, Susanna van der Mierendonk, who is my counterpart and the Bader Curator of European Art at the Agnes Etherington Art Center at Queen's University, which is the home institution for all of these wonderful paintings. So this evening we are gathered to celebrate an exhibition that is incredibly near and dear to my heart. I started working formally on it in 2019, but it's actually an exhibition I feel like I started working on when I came here a little over 10 years ago in 2013, because these are paintings that are really familiar to me. So I'm the Bader curator. I was hired as the Isabel and Alfred Bader curator. The 76 paintings in this collection are all drawn from Isabel and Alfred's collection. And as I came here and got to know them and visit them, these paintings were all in their home. And so some of these paintings for me are like old friends, and there's a deep familiarity with a lot of them. There's of course also a deep familiarity with Isabel and Alfred themselves. They were so welcoming and wonderful to me when I came here in 2013. I'm not sure if anyone in the room had the pleasure of knowing them, but they were really exceptional people. They were deeply in love. I think you can see a little bit of that in some of the photographs of them. They were ardent collectors of Dutch and Flemish painting, and they were supporters of countless important causes, cultural, social, and so forth. And those causes continue to be supported through the good work of Bader Philanthropies to this day. And for me, and I think for so many people in the community, obviously their family, when they passed, Alfred in 2018 and Isabel just at the end of last year, it was of course a moment of great sadness, and we do miss them. But I do hope that this exhibition, the catalog we've created, and all of the work we're doing around the collection is in many ways a sort of stands as a testament to how wonderful they were, as a way to honor their memory, and to celebrate what they were able to accomplish and how monumental it truly was. So for those of you who never met Alfred Bader, he used to say that his life was driven or governed by his ABCs: art, the Bible, and chemistry. And if anyone knew him, that's a super familiar thing. He used to say that a lot. So, so he was a collector, a scholar, as well as a dealer in Old Master paintings, specifically Dutch and French, although he dabbled in other areas too. He assembled a really extraordinary collection, many works of which are in the museum right now. But he also sold paintings. He sold paintings to many major museums, including the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam, the J. Paul Getty Museum in Los Angeles, as well as to private collectors here in Milwaukee and far beyond as well. He was the Bible. He was a scholar of the Jewish faith. He himself was a very deeply devout man, and that was a guiding principle in his life and something that governed how he moved through the world and how he treated others. And he was also a brilliant chemist. He had a doctorate in chemistry from Harvard, and he built the company Aldrich Chemical, and you can see the rather beat up guide from Aldrich. That's their sort of what all the chemicals you could order through them. He built that company from the ground up, and that company was what allowed him to build the wealth that allowed him to build the collection that he built, and also then carry out the philanthropy that still defines his legacy today. So when Alfred moved to the city of Milwaukee in the 1950s, the museum had just purchased its very first European painting. And the museum at that point was being led by the director, Edward Dwight, and the painting that Edward Dwight purchased was our Francisco de Zurbaran, probably a pretty familiar painting to most of you. And a really, obviously, seminal purchase for the institution, and in fact, the very first European purchase, because every European painting in the collection that had come in before that point had either been a gift or was a long-term loan. So this was the first moment when the museum said, this is what we're doing. And so Alfred recognized immediately the commitment that that represented, and not only connected with the museum right away, but also began giving paintings himself pretty quickly thereafter and started giving them on a regular basis. And this is a really beautiful Isaac Soreau still life that he gave in 1962. We just recently had this painting conserved and reframed, and it looks quite lovely. It's up in the galleries. So he as said, continued to give paintings at a rather steady clip. And then he also contributed to the museum in a way that maybe you might not expect. He actually acted as a guest curator for two different exhibitions. In 1976, he was the curator for the exhibition, The Bible Through Dutch Eyes, which was precisely that. It was a study of Dutch artists painting biblical scenes. That's going to become really familiar in a moment when I start taking you through the exhibition. And if you've been through the exhibition, that will ring really true. And then in 1989, he and his wife Isabel worked on the exhibition, The Detective's Eye, Investigating the Old Masters, which was a fabulous exhibition that really sort of pulled back the curtain on connoisseurship and curatorial work and kind of allowed a window into the sort of study of objects that we do as curators and kind of take for granted. And so it demystified a lot of that. It was a wonderful, the catalog is wonderful. I didn't see the exhibition. I was not here at that point, but it was really quite important, the role that they played as guest curators, because the museum, up until 1997, never had a curator of European art. 1997 is when the museum hired their first dedicated European curator. Before that point, there had been chief curators who had specializations in European art, but they did everything else too. So this was 1997 was that first moment. So when Alfred and Isabel were acting as guest curators, they were filling a role that the museum wasn't able to fulfill. So that was a really important foundational role that they played. So it's clear that Isabel and Alfred really were central to the institution's history. And it is very difficult to walk through a European gallery, and I'm showing you just two of the galleries on the main level there. It's hard to walk through one of the European galleries, particularly on the first floor, and not see a Bader painting or point out a Bader painting. I mean, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 in those two photographs of the galleries alone. So it's really fitting that we are doing this project now, because these two people really were sort of important founding figures for the institution. It's also really wonderful because this coincides with the sort of formal endowment of the European program here at the museum as the Isabel and Alfred Bader program, which is wonderful because their name will now permanently be affixed to anything having to do with European art connected to this museum, which is wonderful. But this is not a project that emerged in isolation. I mentioned my co-curator, Susanna van der Mierendonk, from the Agnes Etherington Art Center at Queen's University. The Agnes was, Queen's University was Alfred's alma mater. Queen's University was a very important institution in Alfred's life, and I'll tell that story in just a moment. So I started working on this project with my co-curator in 2020 when she took on her role there at the Agnes. And we worked on this all through the pandemic. We were constantly, meeting over Zoom and divining the checklist, the themes, and working on the catalog, sort of gathering it all together. And so this was a project that really was part of a collaborative process. And the reason we were able to do this project is because Bader Philanthropies gave the Agnes Etherington Art Center a major grant in order to replace their sort of failing, or inadequate, I should say, museum building, which is the one you see in the upper left, with these are two renderings of the new building that they're going to be building. And so during that time, the collection will be entirely off view there. So this was a really nice opportunity to take the collection that had been formed here in Milwaukee and bring it back here to be sort of in the place where it was built in the first place. So now the exhibition features some of the best works in the Bader collection. We focused exclusively on 17th century Dutch and Flemish paintings. So there are significant pieces by Rembrandt van Rijn, Jan Lievens, Peter Lastman, as well as other Rembrandt students like Govard Flink, Gerbrand van den Eekhout, and a lot of artists you've probably never heard of. But I really, truly hope that, and I feel strongly, actually, that these are paintings that are really reward your close looking and scrutiny, and I think that they will become, these artists who are maybe unfamiliar will become quite significant to you. So I'm going to take you on a little bit of a preview of the exhibition so you can understand how it's structured, why we organize things the way we did, and sort of what the story the exhibition is telling actually is. So every collection, whether it's public or private, has a certain character to it, an idiosyncratic quality that really makes it unique, and the Bader collection is absolutely no different. In addition to having a focus on the work of Rembrandt van Rijn, the Bader collection is also distinguished by having an extraordinarily high number of paintings depicting scenes from the Hebrew Bible or Old Testament. Some of the scenes might be less sort of familiar, like scenes from the book of Tobit and Tobias, or Elisha and Gehazi, and various other such scenes, but all of them were intended to teach a lesson, to sort of impart some moral teaching, or to cause a bit of self-reflection on the part of the viewer. And I think that was one of the reasons that Alfred was as drawn as he was to these pictures. They really cause sort of a bit of reflection. There's a sort of humanity to them, and they really they put you in a position where you wonder, what would I have done in that where I put in that particular position. And in fact, all of that connects very much back to that very first exhibition he ever did here at the Art Museum, The Bible Through Dutch Eyes. So there's a very nice, tight connection between these paintings and Alfred's collecting interest. So we decided when we were organizing the exhibition to really lean into that particular strength of the collection, that humanity, not only because it's part of what defined who Alfred was as a collector, but also because if we group these paintings thematically into thematic groupings, and I'll take you through the various themes in just a moment, you actually begin to get a sense of who Alfred was and what was important to him, because those themes all resonated with who he was as an individual and also helped to tell the story of his life. So by the time you get through the first section of the exhibition, which is just shy of half of the pictures in the show, you will have seen sort of, where we've tried to show you, I should say, sort of a portrait of the collector himself. So I'm going to take you through those themes now and then through the rest of the exhibition from there. So one of the earliest themes you'll encounter is that of struggle. And to say that Alfred's early life began in struggle would be an understatement. He was born in Vienna on the eve of World War II. He lost his father at a young age and was raised by his paternal aunt, Gisela Reich, in the Jewish faith. And then following the arrival of the Nazis in Vienna in 1938, and then the events of Kristallnacht, Gisela Reich knew that she needed to get Alfred out to safety. And so she arranged for him to be evacuated from the city on the first Kindertransport. And so he was evacuated from Vienna to England and put in a displaced persons camp. He stayed there for about a year. And then from there, he was sent to Canada and put in a prisoner of war camp. He stayed there for about a year. And then finally, after that period in the prisoner of war camp, they realized this man is not a threat. And he was allowed to apply for university because he was at that age. And so he applied to several Canadian universities. And he discovered that many of these universities had a Jewish quota, which is to say they only admitted a certain number of Jews, and at that point, they would not admit any more. And so these universities were not willing to admit Alfred, except for Queens. Queens welcomed him. Queens made a home for him. Queens became such a central part of who Alfred was because they took him in when no one else would. He was able there to study chemistry and mathematics, and from there go on to Harvard to get his doctorate in chemistry, and from there move eventually to Milwaukee to start up and build his company. So that is sort of a thumbnail sketch of Alfred's life. It's obviously a very condensed version. So when Alfred looked at paintings like this painting by Philips Koenig, Solomon dedicating the temple outside of Jerusalem, paintings that show moments that are marking the end of a long period of struggle and sort of journeying and difficult circumstances, and this kind of culmination and relief at the end of that, there must have been a special resonance for Alfred in terms of thinking back on the early events of his life. Sacrifice. When Alfred said goodbye to his family in Vienna, he of course had no way of knowing that he would never see them again. They all perished in the war. So he never saw his family again. And of course, there's no greater sacrifice than the sacrifice of a child. And Nicholas Maas, in this dramatic painting of Abraham's sacrifice, shows the moment when Abraham is about to sacrifice his son Isaac. He's pulling his knife out of its sheath, and this angel descends suddenly to save the life of young Isaac. And this is exactly what Alfred's family did for, not exactly, but this is what Alfred's family did for him. They sacrificed him to get him to safety so that he could live just like Isaac could live. So there's this kind of resonance in these pictures. Journey. So of course, Alfred traveled a lot. He went from Vienna to England to Canada to Cambridge, Massachusetts to Milwaukee, and then even once he had settled here in the city, he continued to travel throughout his entire life, and probably more so than many people will ever get to travel. But I think when you think about the notion of journey or traveling, it's not only physical, but it can also be spiritual or metaphysical. And that very much aligned with Alfred's sort of curious nature. And that is echoed in this really beautiful painting by Gilles Nates. This is a wonderful, one of 4 paintings in the exhibition that depicts a scene from the book of Tobit and Tobias. This painting, if you can believe it, is oil on copper, and it's about this big. So it's luminous and wonderful. And so in this painting, we see Tobias. He and the angel Gabriel are in the bottom right-hand corner. You can see them. Tobias is actually waving, which is really delightful. And And they are traveling on the road. Tobias is on this journey to help his family. And because of his faith, the angel is watching over him and traveling with him and protecting him. And what's so charming about this painting is that Nates has chosen to set this particular scene in just on the outskirts of the city of Antwerp. So the city skyline on the left-hand side of the composition is the city skyline of Antwerp. So this notion of going on this kind of long journey, long quest with a goal in mind is something, again, that would have had resonance for Alfred. Obviously, faith is a leitmotif. This entire first section is all about scenes from the Bible, so faith is something that's central to who Alfred was, central to his identity, and it's a central theme in terms of paintings that are in the collection. But sometimes paintings, struggle with that, and this work in particular shows a scene of a loss of faith. So in this work by Caran van den Eekhout, you see Solomon, and he has been warned by the Lord not to marry outside of his faith. Solomon ignores that advice and instead marries multiple women outside of his faith. And the fear had been that he would begin to worship false idols, and in fact, that's precisely what van den Eekhout is showing him doing. He's kneeling on the ground in front of a golden idol, and behind him at his feet you see two of his wives, and in the far background you can see two more wives sort of peeking in to the place of worship. And so this is a moment of a loss of faith. This is a moment of being tempted and straying from the path. And the painting becomes a reminder to stay true to your faith and to stay true to your sense of belief. Generosity. From a very early age, Alfred was inspired by his paternal aunt, his adopted mother, Gisela Reich. She was an incredibly generous woman. Even when the family had very little to share, she would always find a way of helping people who needed help and sharing with others what little that they had, she would share. And that was a model that Alfred took to heart and something that he continued to do himself all throughout his entire life. And of course, that continues on even now after his passing through his foundation. A number of paintings in the exhibition deal with this theme in various ways. In this particular painting by Abraham van Dyck, we see a scene immediately after a moment of generosity and then a sort of miraculous realization at the end. This painting shows us the widow of Zarephath and her son. They are saying grace before a meal. It seems like a quiet domestic scene, but what we're not seeing is what has happened just before this, which is the prophet Elijah has come to the widow and has said to her, can you share your bread with me? And she has just enough flour and oil to make bread for herself and her son, and then they're going to essentially die of starvation. But she says, okay, and so she shares the little meager amount that she has, and then miraculously her stores of bread and her stores of oil and flour do not run out and never run out, and they will always have something to eat. And so this is the sort of realization of that, the thanks for that, and in response to the great generosity that she showed. And the final sort of theme in this opening section is family. As someone who lost his family at an incredibly young age, the notion of family, the idea of family was just central to who Alfred was. And he very early on learned a lesson that some people take their whole lives to figure out, which is that your family is not only who you are related to by birth, your family is also who you make it. And Alfred not only made an actual biological family here in Milwaukee, but he also had this wonderfully large and rich extended network of people he was close to, friends, and so forth, all around the world, and he stayed in close touch with so many of them. And so family for him was central and important and a real sort of guiding North Star. And there's no biblical story that better captures this idea of family and how complicated it can be than that of Ruth and Naomi. So Naomi was the mother of two sons. Those two sons married Ruth and her sister Orpah. It came to be that both of the sons passed away, and Ruth and her sister were suddenly widows. And Naomi said to Ruth and Orpah, she said, go back to your families. You don't need to stay with me. You should go back to your families, start again. And Orpa decides to go, and you can maybe see her off in the left distance, just a little silhouetted figure. She's walking back to her family. And Ruth instead decides that she will stay with Naomi and says, no, I'm going to stay with you. And she says the following: where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, your God, my God. Where you die, I will die. There will I be buried. And so for us looking at this painting, this incredibly beautiful work by Jan Victors, we realize that Ruth becomes the symbol of sort of steadfast devotion, of loyalty, of human connection, and someone who understands how precious family is. And I think that Victors has captured that so beautifully. The gazes of the two women as they look at one another, the interchange of their hands as they gesture towards one another. It's an incredibly moving and beautiful work. And if you haven't seen it in the exhibition, it will knock you over. It's a beautiful picture. So this brings us through that first opening section of the exhibition. We've sort of learned the story of Alfred's life through all of these paintings. We've understood these themes that animated him. But Alfred was much more than that. I mean, he was that, but there was more to him in terms of his collection. He, more than anything, more than any other artist, loved Rembrandt van Rijn. He pursued his work with enthusiasm and verve and was always looking for the work of Rembrandt. And that was a love that was kindled very, very early on when he was a graduate student at Harvard. So he was studying chemistry, and he used to steal out of the chemistry lab early and sneak across the campus to go to the art history department because Jacob Rosenberg, who was a major scholar of Rembrandt van Rijn, and had just completed a book on the artist, was lecturing. And so he would sneak across, he would go to attend these lectures and learn what he could about Rembrandt, and was totally taken by learning about this artist, because the thing that Rosenberg is known for sort of putting forth is that what makes the work of Rembrandt so moving and so engaging and so beautiful is that he has the ability to depict sort of the humanity in his sitters, to depict human connection. And that is what immediately drew Alfred in, and he was hooked. So in the exhibition, we have three beautiful works by Rembrandt van Rijn, these three paintings. They date from the very earliest part of his career. This work that's closest to me, Head of an Old Man in a Cap, which dates from the period when he was working in the city of Leiden, which was the city of his birth. And you can see that his style is more fine in this particular painting. And the other two date from much later in his life, when he was at his sort of in a state of financial ruin. He'd gone into bankruptcy, but he was also at the same time at his artistic height. So you see the range of his style and the way that he applied paint to panel all throughout the course of his career. And so you can see the way that he evolved from this incredibly refined and yet also experimental style all the way to this incredibly rough, loose, layered, almost inscrutable application of paint. They're really marvelous. These reproductions on this screen do them no justice. You must see them in person. They're not much bigger than this, but they will suck you in. That's just an exhortation to go look at the paintings. The exhibition also contains a range of other materials, a range of other paintings, and Alfred's collection contained a range of other paintings. There are a group of paintings that depict scenes from classical antiquity, and this is a smaller section of the exhibition, but these paintings are too wonderful. There's the beautiful work on the left by Salomon Konink, depicting the mocking of Ceres, and we not only have the Salomon Konink, but we have the Adam Elsheimer painting that was the original source material that Konink was looking at. So you can look at those two paintings right adjacent to one another. And we have two works by the artist Jacob Bakker, including this beautiful work, Granita and Difalo, which depicts a scene drawn from contemporary Dutch theater. There was a play of the same name that was written by the Dutch playwright Pieter Cornelis Hooft, P.C. Hooft, and this was an incredibly popular moment in the play, which shows the sort of moment when the shepherd Diphilo falls deeply in love with the princess Granita, who is out hunting. So this is that moment there. Another section of the exhibition considers the notion of identity, as shown through portraiture, but various forms of portraiture. The first being more sort of traditional formal portraiture. So in the Dutch Republic during this period, there's this tremendous influx of wealth. And so many citizens wanted to have their portrait painted. So there's a great sort of rise across the board in the types of paintings being painted, but portraits rise right up there with everything else. And so the Wallerand Feiland painting on the left, showing a man rising from his desk, is quite distinctive in that it exemplifies one of the things that Dutch portraiture during this period does, which is to gain a sense of animation and movement. And you see the way that he's captured this man sort of standing and moving. And then the work closest to me, quite a different portrait, but a really beautiful example of court portraiture that was being painted in the court of The Hague in the Netherlands during this period. And this painting was actually a gift from Alfred to Isabel on her birthday. She was someone who loved historic costume, and so this painting, as you can imagine, with its abundance of lace, coral beads, and so forth, would have been of extreme interest to her. So it's a beautiful, beautiful example of the type. There's also a type of character study that the Dutch referred to as a tronie. That's the Dutch word for it. And these paintings, and these are two examples, were essentially artists painting models, often using them as figures that they would then insert into paintings, or using them as an opportunity to study facial features, expressions, costume, and so forth. So the work on the left, the Jan de Brij, is a wonderful example of the type of figure that you would see very frequently in his large multi-figure history paintings. And the Jan Lievens, closest to me, is a masterclass in the study of texture, from the beautiful way he's treating her aging skin to the wonderful study of drapery and the sort of diaphanous layers and the embroidery that you see in the textiles, as well as that sort of row of little buttons that run down the front of her shirt, the gleam of those. It's really quite an exquisite picture. And then finally, self-portraiture, in which artists are looking back upon themselves and studying their own facial features. Sometimes, in the case of Willem Drost, you have an artist who decides to depict himself as a saint, because he can. And so you see him here as St. John the Evangelist, holding the cup that identifies him, and looking quite young and dashing. And then on the right, closest to me, Michiel Swierts's self-portrait with a skull. This is one of my favorite paintings. This actually is the cover of the catalog, because I like it so much. And this is a particularly wonderful work because this was a rediscovery made by Alfred. So this was not, when he purchased this, it was not attributed to Swierts. It actually was originally, the skull had been painted over in the 19th century, so when he bought it, it was just a portrait of a man pointing at nothing. So he had the painting conserved, the 19th century overpaint was removed, and the skull was revealed. And that's when the attribution to Swierts became firmly established. And it's also particularly fascinating because why in the world would you want a painting of a man poking his finger in the nasal cavity of a skull? This is very much about the artist cheating death. So of course this painting has gone on to live far beyond his years. And in fact, it's particularly poignant because we know that about a year after he painted this painting, Swierts left on a missionary trip with a group of Jesuits to Goa, and he didn't survive. So this is a very sort of poignant, moving work from that perspective. So the final section of the exhibition really kind of brings us up to current scholarship and considers the notion of the Dutch world writ large, in which we tend to think of the Dutch Republic as the sort of the golden age, and it's this kind of artistic and cultural and financial juggernaut. And it certainly was that. It was all of those things. But this section also considers the way the Dutch Republic became that way. The larger global enterprise the Dutch were involved in terms of trade, in terms of colonialism, in terms of all sorts of things. And also thinks about, who is benefiting from that process, who is enjoying this golden age, and who is not. So this section is really divided into two parts. The first considers the notion of expansion and trade. That can be expansion in a very simple way, such as Carl Dujardin traveling down to Italy from the Netherlands and painting the Italian landscape and creating these beautiful sun-drenched images for the Dutch market. Or it can be much more complex, thinking about trade as funded by the two major trading companies of the Dutch Republic, the Dutch East and the Dutch West India companies, and the roles that they played in terms of colonialism, the extractive policies that they were involved in, and the way that benefited the Republic, the Dutch Republic, but not always the places they were drawing those resources from. And then, of course, how all of that is then manifest in paintings. And you might be looking at this still life by Willem Kalf and thinking, what in the world is she talking about? I will take you through it. So in the beautiful still life by Kalf, you see a gorgeous Wanli bowl. That comes from China. The Dutch were actively trading with China. There is also a really beautiful oriental carpet. The Dutch, of course, were trading with the Far East. And there's also a nautilus cup, a shell cup. And these shells are really quite fascinating. They were very avidly collected. There were groups of people who just loved these shells and would collect them. And so they were very much in demand. But a shell doesn't just come like this. It comes with a little creature living in it and all kinds of gunk on the outside. So there's a lot of cleaning and work that needs to happen to these shells, which come from the Pacific and Indian Oceans. There's a lot of work that comes from making these shells into these beautiful shining objects that you're seeing in Kalf's painting. And that work was often done by indigenous people or enslaved people. So that labor is obscured by this beautiful object, but it's nevertheless part of the story of the painting. And then the second part of the last section of the exhibition deals with the domestic, so the flip side of that coin, the degree to which the Dutch Republic was a place of duality. So it was a country that had this kind of broad global presence, but it was also a country that was very happy at home, so to speak, particularly following their winning of independence from the Spanish in 1648. There was a real sort of pride in the domestic and the local that the Dutch is very much evident in Dutch painting. So you see that in sort of simple domestic scenes, like Jacobus Vrel's woman darning a stocking. It's not a subject that you would think you would paint a painting of, and yet it's this mesmerizing little work. Or something as simple as the very humble still life by Peter Klaas showing a roamer with shrimp. And this is a painting that celebrates a lot of sort of domestic products that come from the Netherlands. So the shrimp in the bowl are from the North Sea. The bread is likely made with grain grown there in the Dutch Republic. It was a very agrarian economy. But even in this painting, there are little tentacles of that kind of global Dutch world that sneak in. So the shrimp are displayed in a blue and white bowl. It's unclear if that's a Chinese bowl or if that's a Dutch a blue and white bowl made to emulate Chinese ware, but more affordable. And there's also, you'll see right next to the handle of the knife is a little twist of paper, and spilling out of that twist of paper is pepper. And of course, pepper is a widely traded spice. So you can see that there's a sort of breadth and intermingling of these areas. So the exhibition has genuinely been a joy to work on. And there's so much more in the catalog than I could obviously talk about tonight. That's the cover of the catalog. I encourage you, if it's of interest, to take a look. That's the result of the hard work of Catherine Sawinski, who I mentioned, my co-curator, Susanna van der Mierendonk, and myself. It's a project that, as I've been working on it, particularly these last few weeks, I've thought how much of a shame it was that Alfred and Isabel weren't here to see it. But for me, it's really enough to know that so many of you and so many, members of the public here in Milwaukee will get to see it. And I've thought of them a lot these past days, and I've thought in particular of a passage that the two of them wrote in their book, The Detective's Eye, in 1989, that exhibition that was here at the museum. And I'm just going to read from it because it's so lovely. The function of art is to lift our spirits, to make us feel better. It's as untrue to believe that a $10 million painting is automatically better art and more likely to lift our spirits than a work selling for a small fraction of that, as it is untrue to believe that a man whose income is $1 million a year is automatically a better, more valuable person than a man who earns far less. So I want you to think of that as you go through the exhibition. I want you to imagine them looking over your shoulder, encouraging you to look closely, encouraging you to sort of share in their curiosity, and most importantly, encouraging you to share in their joy. So thank you. I can take questions if people have questions. Otherwise, please just go look at the exhibition. It's far more eloquent than I am. So, yeah. The Agnes Etherington Art Center, where is it? It's in Kingston, Ontario, in Canada. Yes. Mm-hmm.
But I noticed in some of them that you could see kind of shapes, silhouettes, shadows, and I was wondering, were those meant to be there, or could some of these paintings have been like this one, where there was something underneath painted over, do you know?
It really varies painting to painting. For the most part, these works have been pretty carefully studied, so we know what the underdrawing is, if there's a second painting underneath the original painting. They've been studied pretty carefully, so for the most part we know, but it really varies widely depending on the painting. And sometimes pigments change. Over time they sink a little bit, they darken, so detail will get lost as a result of that. But yeah, it's widely varied. Yes? Yeah, they are beautiful frames. I haven't specifically in this exhibition, but there are a lot of beautiful period Dutch frames in the show, sort of black ribbon frames, beautiful carved frames. So yeah, they're really quite exquisite. And those kinds of black frames are really typical of Dutch pictures from this period. So, yes?
Can I ask a question about one particular painting?
Yes.
The woman who's praying over the bread with her child.
Yes.
Son. Do you have thoughts about why that child's face is really the look of an adult, and more than an adult? It's quite old, but the hair and everything looks like it would be a young boy, but the face is so. Is that the stranger, or what did you think?
I don't know. It might just be an awkwardness in the rendering. It's hard to say. I think there's a sort of solemnity about the painting generally that is certainly echoed in his features. So I would lean towards that more than anything. Yeah. Thank you, everyone. Please enjoy. Oh, wait, one more. Sorry. So the Bader collection, it has 500 objects in it, about 300 of which are paintings. So it's really big. So this is 76 objects in the exhibition. So we really picked the cream from the top. So these are the best things they've got. Thank you, everyone. Please enjoy the exhibition.